across them, those are the things that will translate. And you want to take those, package them up, and then apply them.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we wanted to do today was go through a real example. I'm going to screen share, and I hope this works. But okay, that worked. Sweet. Cool. The background's still there too. Do you mind giving our audience some perspective on what this is all about?
Yeah, will do. And first I want to give Amelia a shout out because she likes the background that you picked, Will. And we were talking about this like right before we went live. What should the background be? So Amelia, I'm glad you recognize that this is the background for today's session. So
it came default with the software. I'm thrilled.
Yeah, I totally think you should have taken the lavender credit because it's very lavender-esque. But
I'm getting some inspo.
So one of the things that both of us really love doing is coaching sessions where anybody can come, just find some time, ask questions. And we do a lot of things like rewrites. And so this was an AE who reached out and said, hey, I've been working with this account. We're kind of getting later down the funnel. And I want to know what you think about this follow-up email. What would you do? So there's some, that's pretty much the context that I have going into this. And so I think the way to go about it is I'm going to read it. Let's call out some of the things that I think are solid and then some things that maybe we would change. So you get, again, to the point on frameworks. It's about the way to think about it, the principles, and then we'll rewrite it and we'll look at some before and after. And then we're going to ask everybody in the audience, like, what do you think? Which version do you like? Okay.
When I think of the rewrite too, we'll show them the framework that we're applying to it, and then we'll show them how that applies.
There you go. That's the goal. All right. Perfect. So let's start. So subject line, partnership update, self-serve product tours. So that's the product that we're selling. We're gonna play the part of the A here. So it looks like the contact, so the director level just gets back from vacation. I connected with John briefly last week. So I'm assuming here that John is the marketing VP. So great. You're talking with somebody who is ostensibly higher up in the decision-making organization. So reach out for an update during our convo, express the importance of trust in selling a long-term retirement solution. Okay, I can see that. In an initiative of yours was to give website visitors a glimpse of what it would be like to use your product, build trust, drive conversions. Giving your visitors a taste of dashboards workflow would even help. So I'm assuming that these 3 lines are kind of pulling out or just reminding Sarah before she left on vacay some of the things that she brought up in some of the demos. So like that. Good job in discovery. Close rate is in the 60% range. Good fact. Okay, so here's where we get down into the meat of it. So after some back of napkin math, it's apparent increasing conversion percentage into larger ops. So I think this is where we're tying back into product. Taking it up, you expressed an interest in persona-based tours. This to say, it seems like we'd make a great fit. Curious if I can continue to offer reduced pricing of 8,000 off. Are you ready to automate conversions? Does it make sense to speak? I'm excited to chat again soon. Okay. So here's the context. It looks like he's beginning to position the deal for a close, and he needs Sarah's buy-in because John, I'm going to make an assumption here that in the conversation with John, he was generally for it, but he wants his team bought in on the deal as well. So right off the bat, what strikes me is Sarah is in triage mode. And this is something that you talk a lot about, the inbox as triage. I think that is never more true than when you're getting back from vacation. And so you 100%. Have just this like crush of things, right?
Yeah.
You went and you climbed, was it Mount Rainier? Is it Rainier? Okay.
Yep.
And so when you got back, what did you think of your inbox?
Well, okay. So for Rainier, one of the things that I was doing pre-climb, because like I was there a little bit during the week, but like I was just kind of checking in for my phone. So I was checking some of the boxes, but a couple weeks prior to that, went to Italy and was actually like out of office. Okay. Now for that, my inbox was an absolute zoo, right? Because it was a solid 10 days of just like mayhem in there. Yeah.
So you had a choice. You can either do something about the email that you would read. You're trying to tame all the animals in that zoo of an inbox. So you can do something about it. You can delegate it to somebody else. you can defer it and come back to it a little later, or you could just delete it and be like, wow, this is clutter. Let me just get rid of this. So if I were Sarah, I would defer this one because it would signal to me, okay, John is on this. Clearly, I need to do something about it, but I'd hit a wall of text and be like, I don't know what the ask is here. What am I to do with this? So the first principle that I think we could apply here is a little bit of BLUF, bottom line up front. And
that's funny. Like I've heard so many different like phrases for it, right? The blot, bottom line on top.
Okay.
BLUF. I like the BLUF because actually it's a little bit more like accurate. Right? Bottom line up front. I guess like I always thought of it top. But yeah, that makes sense. I dig it. It's sort of like the TLDR.
Yeah, exactly. Give me the TLDR. Tell me what this is about. And then I can go in. And so like a very easy tactic to make that switch is literally go down, copy and paste the last line in your email, put it up front, and then use that as your starting point. Because most people write, in a very, I start my thinking and then I follow the train all the way to the end of the track. So then that's where I end.
It's how you're taught to write in school, right? Yeah. You're taught to put the thesis at the bottom. And so like you always have to like flip that pyramid for business writing so that the thesis sits at the top. Yeah. Now it's interesting you say that because there's one other thing from a triage perspective that stood out to me, and it's the subject line. I am adamant that like subject line should start with your company name when it's mid-funnel, because back to your triage point, instead of having to do all this work to like remind them of like what your company is, right? Like you could just start with your company name and then partnership update, and that's all you needed to say.
Yep, I got it. Hey, I saw Autumn say, can you zoom in a little bit?
Yeah, I saw that too. That's why I zoomed in.
Okay, cool. So if you guys need more zoom in, you just let us know, but thanks for the shout, Autumn. So I agree with that, by the way. I would also, I go back and forth on the word partnership in the subject line as well. I think why a lot of people do it is they don't want to come across salesy, or it like reduces maybe the sales resistance because this is partnership. And I kind of go back and forth on it because clarity is like paramount. Like at the end of the day, you are in sales, and that's a great thing because sales is helping other people solve problems, get to the payoff. It's like you said
in your post this morning, like they didn't forget that you're selling to them.
Right, exactly. So partnership in my mind puts you in a different category of like there's some like mutual, like you're building integrations together or something like that. Just a quick aside on the subject line, but I do think then if the spirit is, and again I'm making an assumption here that the spirit is I'm going to reduce the salesiness. I think when we get down to the bottom, that is one area that we could work on, and I'll focus on in the rewrite here, is we can make it a little less salesy based on the rewrite and the ask. And so I think more of the direction that we want to go is like, hey, help me gut check some of these assumptions. So I see like an ROI calculator here. And something that I also very much agree with and see you talk a lot about is this idea of guessing or unsure tones and language. And I think this can help us here with this ask. So, hey, built something for you. Help me gut check some of the assumptions. Let's figure out if we're on the right track together. I think that's more of the tone direction that we want to go. So
I dig that. Okay, so we've got the BLUF, which the BLUF from this one is going to be something along the lines of, I spoke to John, and he asked me to reconnect with you this week, right? Because that kind of mitigates a lot of the preference to want to defer that back to John, because it kind of gets hidden in here.
Yep, and I like that. And to the seller's credit, it's great. Like he references the fact that this is based on John's recommendation. So it's like, hey, hope you enjoyed vacay. John and he suggested I reach out once you're back. And then I think we go one step deeper in the bottom line, which is pulled together a before and after snapshot. And it'd be great. I'll let you catch up. Before after snapshot. And it'd be great to get your eyes on it to gut check some assumptions.
About this, when I say mind gut checking my assumptions.
There you go. Brevity is great. And then, so here's what I suggest we do here is we let's make the ask and then put more of the context down below it. Like we'll use a bit of an elongated PS. Let me know what you think about this.
Yeah.
More of like an elongated PS, because I do appreciate that he's pulling some of the points that he heard in the other conversations and like to the litmus test of like, yeah, it would be weird for somebody else to get this email because it wouldn't relate to them at all.
Yeah.
But again, post vacay, say, hey, open to weighing in for a few minutes, maybe Friday, something like that.
Okay.
And then
gut checking my assumptions. And then I'll say later. Maybe we double question. Maybe we can connect later this week. Okay. At 1 p.m. question mark. Like that.
There you go. And then it's like name, seller, sign off, and then we'll go down into the PS. And so I just say like PS, quick recap before we chat, or quick context before we chat, something like that.
Got it.
Yep. And so let's actually go, while we're zoomed in here, let's go back up. And what I'm always a big fan of is trigger phrases. And trigger phrases are very specific
like
words.
This.
Close rate 60% range. Great. Let's see what else. Build trust and drive conversions. That's also very good.
Okay.
And we can just like, we can create like a little inventory.
Yeah.
Close rate in the 60% range. There you go. I like it.
For sub 100 opportunities, that probably one.
There you go.
The ones I'm missing here.
I have these. Let's go back up.
60% range. You had one that you mentioned that I missed.
Ops to demo. Let's see, persona-based tours.
Build trust and drive conversions.
Yeah, build trust and drive conversions.
Okay. Yeah, it's in here. It's hidden.
Yep. Now, what's this? So let's study this for the bigger ops. I know John mentioned that once the first call happens, the close rate is in the 60% range. After doing some back and napkin math, it's apparent increasing the conversion percentage would also demonstrate. Okay, so this is going to be interesting. So there are two different pieces that we have to tie together here. And actually, on the first read, I didn't catch this. I kind of glossed over it. So it sounds like there are two different value props that we're speaking to here, which is like the lower opportunities and then a high close rate. So that first one is for the bigger opportunities, 60% range. Okay. So let's keep the bottom line upfront type idea here. And we're going to use, there's another framework that I love called the Minto pyramid, which is basically like, your big idea up front, and then your supporting ideas as you get further and further down into the recap.
Yeah.
So,
there's something to this, Nate, that I don't think a lot of sellers recognize. And I think it's important to call out importance of BLUF real quick. Your reader is 8 times more likely to pick up their phone and see this for the first time. And so when they see the BLUF, that gives them something quick for them to like understand the context of why you're reaching out, and then immediately know what they need to do. And if they want to dig into the larger picture later, they can start to scroll down and get that. So the framing and structure that you're talking about is literally built around how they will actually experience your email.
Yeah, it's almost like you should shrink the margins in the stock as we're working, like make it a little skinnier. So if we're getting a little wordy here, it calls us out. It's a good one. All right. So maybe that'll be our final audit here. Okay. So quick recap. So I would start like, what's the bottom line of this person's job is driving, sourcing more pipeline, like marketing source pipeline. And so I would say something like more marketing source pipeline equals more revenue. And then we could go in and say, okay, so what drives that? Close rates. Like if close rates are good, so we need more pipeline. right? And so we can weave that in.
Yeah.
So more marketing source pipe equals more revenue. Close rates.
Quick question. Since they're coming back from vacation, they were a little worried. Because they're kind of them. And sometimes that is helpful, right? Like I think of sales, right? We have a pipeline call every week where we discuss open opportunities, etc. Your buyer doesn't do the same thing. It's like I don't think about you in the same way. And so like I actually appreciated the reminder, but maybe like we shorten it up some, right? Which is like quick recap. Yeah. You're looking at our company. Our company's self-guided tours to help drive more conversions. Yeah. More marketing sourced pipeline equals more revenue, like that.
Yep.
I just like it sets the stage for them to get the context coming off of 10 days in Italy.
I dig it. And I'll just say one other principle is like sometimes what you just got to do is like get the wordy stuff down. Like we're talking about optimizing this for brevity, for quick understanding, but sometimes that's really hard to do in your first pass. So just write a little long, and then you can go back and you can cut it down, which is what we'll do at the very end here.
Exactly. There's almost like two modes to this. There's the writing mode, and then there's the editing mode.
Right. So here's maybe two thoughts of what we could do next. We could either just reinforce as like close rates are looking solid, therefore it's about just increasing pipeline. The other thing that we can do is we can go into the approach. We got to tie in her goal to the product right here, which you just self-guided product tours. And this is where I think that building trust trigger phrase comes in. So
the building trust that seemed to be associated with the smaller ops, right? The sub hundreds. So do we create the split here where we start to talk about both?
That is so interesting because I would have applied it to the bigger ops of like, before you can even open up an op, somebody's got to be interested in holding a conversation. And if you haven't talked to them, I imagine that these bigger ops it's more of a sales led motion. And so like before you even talk to them, somebody's got to trust that like, oh yeah, okay, you can have a retirement solution. So it's like build some trust with the product tour, let them see a little bit of the product. And then it's like, hey, when they talk to sales, close rate is phenomenal, 60%. Like, let's get more of them in there. So the key is building trust. We know that when they talk to sales, There we go. And so then I think this is where we can link out to that recap to say, here's an example of what could happen when we build trust, or here's a before after that snapshot.
Yeah.
And I think we're pretty much done there. One thing we can actually open up that attachment. Yep. And look at it, because I'm kind of crossing the line between email and what you want to do in a call. But often what you can benefit from is switching up the frame of that ROI calculator to more like, hey, every month that goes by when we don't have this preview in place to build trust, here's the amount of deals we lose. We know close rates are good, so it comes down to, are we driving that pipeline or not? So
we put together some quick math to show impact for the smaller ops as well as bigger ones. And that way it's not like ROI calculator, right? It's
there you go.
A little bit more how I describe it at the dinner table as opposed to how I describe it in like a white paper.
Exactly. And it's like the impact that could be. It's not today because this isn't in place, but what could be. Which is different from saying like, hey, there's this opportunity that you can pursue. It's gravy on top, which is how a lot of ROI calculations come across, like you want to avoid looking like extra gravy that's a nice to have thing.
Yeah. All right, my cold email brain is thinking to itself like, all right, average reading time per email is 10 seconds. Do we cut off here? Where are you thinking is like enough?
Yeah, especially because the context on this is post vacay. And so I keep like hitting on that is this is immediately in the defer camp and we need to like drag it forward into the, okay, I'm going to do something about this.
Yeah. So we say, let me know about Friday. So you could get your thoughts here.
So I'm gonna call out while you finish this up. Dan
down there.
Dan had an interesting thought. So how do you two see guidance changing as the deal moves down the funnel? It makes a ton of sense to blot, bluff, invert early on. Once we're in the later stages, does it make sense to walk your decision maker champion through the thought process? You know, similar guidance that intro emails need to be short, while later stage emails can get lengthier, and that's okay. So I'll take a swing at this, and I'm curious for your thoughts, Will.
Yeah.
I think, Dan, part of your question is like, do you need to rehash all of this once you're deep in the sales cycle with somebody? Is this going to be too much like repetitive stuff? Do you need to walk them through the thought process again? There are two things. One, the idea of BLUF is that you want to actually avoid that like wandering journey through the thought process by putting it up front. And depending on the scenario, but oftentimes you are just a sliver, a very small fraction of that person's week or month. And so if what you are talking through doesn't reconnect and you're not triggering some type of memory, some phrase that's familiar with them, then the rest of that conversation, they're going to be back on that first point of like, where are we going? Like, what is this? And so it is helpful. And you can even caveat that with like, hey, I imagine you are doing a ton of different things through the week that doesn't involve this project. Would it be helpful for me to just do a quick like 30-second recap of where we're at? So if you're unsure, feel free to throw something like that out, more on the conversational side or as like a quick caveat. So that's my take. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, I'm a fan of anytime an email is going to go long, BLUF or blot, or I like BLUF. Actually, now it's like becoming a vocab for me. I like the BLUF because as soon as you give them the BLUF, most executives like just don't have time for 99% of what you're going to put out there. And so if you give them that quick high level that they can grasp onto and be like, oh, okay, cool. Got it. Thanks. I think it's a nice way to like keep executives up to date. I'm curious, Nate, when you think about like a deal and like moving it to close, we know that there's multiple people involved. I think one of the biggest challenges is keeping executives involved. That's not an easy thing. I think a lot of us, I'm curious, like, how do you think through that?
Yeah. So if we're assuming that the executive has already sponsored the project, and the reason why I use the word project is like they've agreed this is a big problem that should be solved and I've prioritized this. Now we got to go figure out like what to do. Like now you have a project in place, right? So it's different if it's before or after. Like, does this executive even care that discovery is going on or not? And assuming they do, I'm a big fan of the no response required updates, where you are sending a couple sentences on, keeping the champion in the loop to say, hey, just wanted to keep you posted. We discovered something pretty interesting that is changing our direction. Here's where we're headed. If you have a thought, feel free. Otherwise, we'll continue on until our next check-in, a month later or whatever it is.
I love the optionality of that because my gut is like try to get them to respond. And I'm like, hey, does this align with like strategic initiatives? ? But like that sort of gets out of the headspace of like this isn't supposed to be looping them in, right? It's just be like here's a status update and stay up to date, which I think is actually probably going to pull more favorability than you, because like they probably won't respond.
Oh yeah, it's true. I mean, that was the biggest like surprise or learning point for me the first time I started building up a team and building up a business unit, managing a lot of cross-functional stuff. It was the first time where I could not do everything in my week that I needed to do, not even that I wanted to do, that I needed to do. And so I had to very actively and consciously choose, like, what are the things that I am just going to trust get figured out, or somebody else will figure out. And so it's this constant game of trying to see the volume of stuff that's happening and work on the right things. And so that's what you're helping the executive do, is do their job of staying up to date and informed on everything that's happening underneath them, but allowing them the choice of what's the highest value thing to spend a couple minutes on in that moment. So that's why I like the no response required update.
Yeah. And it's like, kind of gets to like a larger picture of like how you plan out your approach to an account, right? Because like, okay, I know this person is going to be involved, and so I'm making a conscious effort to like communicate with them, even if like they don't necessarily like want to actively communicate back with me. You're enabling them to be involved in the process without having to actually like do anything.
That's right. And especially early on. So obviously the earlier in the deal that they're involved, the better. And it's a great question to ask, is like most executives are a little idiosyncratic. There are certain things about them that are quirky that they do a little differently than others. And it goes so far as just to say like, hey, great. Sounds like Sarah is the next person on your team that I need to talk to. How would you like me to keep you updated from here? Any preferences, things that I can do that are most helpful? Some people don't want those updates. Some people love those updates. Some people have very specific styles for those updates. And just ask. And it's if you do that up front and then follow that, they'll notice.
Yeah, I like that. The other thing I think of is like, I come in to an organization and I've tried prospecting to the decision maker, and then I get kicked down to middle management. Or even if it's like, someone on the front lines, and I'm starting conversation there. One of the things that we, Lavender, have found really effective is using the insights from that conversation to start to loop in that person at the top, right? It's like, okay, VP of sales might not be like intimately involved in the purchase of Lavender. It depends on the organization, right? But like, hey, let's say Jane is our CRO in idea. I said, Jane, I talked to Nate, and assume you're like director of, outbound sales or something. Like, talk to Nate. Here's what I'm hearing from Nate. And like, here's the conversation that we're having. I'm curious, like, how do you think about approaching that note in particular from your sort of like account planning perspective? Because like, it sounds like in that scenario, right? Like the deal is kind of moving forward without this person. And like that person's probably going to be a decision maker down the line, but maybe your buyer hasn't necessarily explicitly stated that to you yet.
Right. So if they haven't explicitly stated that, and you haven't said like, hey, I'm going to reach out to this person, expect that that email will get back to that person. It will be forwarded on to them. And so the question is one, does it help you further that conversation on down the line? Are you putting something in there of like, hey, by the way, I was really impressed that Will has been doing this with his team, or something like that. So make it helpful to that first person. And then the second thing is begin to set up or frame what the problem is and what they're going to care about. They really don't care what the product is, what Lavender does at that point in time. But what they do care about is the reason why that person thought it interesting to take the call. Because if I'm all the way at the top of the food chain, my job is to stay abreast of issues, threats that are working against our goals. And so if they're talking about something that I need to know about, like if it was my team and I was managing this person, I'd be like, why haven't I heard this in one of our one-on-ones or something like that, right? So you want to make sure that you're setting up the issue in a way that, to your earlier point, like one of the most helpful emotions on a cold email is curiosity. Like, oh, interesting. It's like, nobody's talking about this in our org yet, but this is interesting. And chances are they're going to go to that person first before you, but it could get them involved in the deal, or at least make it more helpful for your first point of contact in your second conversation with them.
Yeah, I love that. Because like this idea of multi-threading within accounts, right? Getting multiple stakeholders involved has become so much more popularized because we know it works, right?
Right.
We know that we're buying by just like committee, and yet we're selling as though we're reaching out to a single person. So like having these like back of mind ideas of like, hey, by the way, like if you are doing this and you're trying to loop somebody in, expect the news to get back to them, because you could absolutely torture a relationship if you say the wrong thing.
That's right. And if you were to flip that around, by contrast, the absolute worst thing in your deal would be for that person who's signing the contract to be seeing or reading about it for the very first time at the point of signing the contract. Like that is bad news. And that's what we're helping you to avoid here.
Yeah. So I think there's some other like helpful frameworks we could give sellers today. Thinking through like the traditional process, right? This is a great, like, catching somebody up mid funnel, that we just went through. I'm curious, like, do you have any frameworks? Let's talk like classic mid funnel. So I get them to respond to my awesome cold email, right? I say, I make an observation, I tie that observation to a problem. I explain that, I've seen that problem with other potential clients or other clients that potentially look like them. Then I, explain exactly what we provided to solve said problem that I alluded to in the first place. And they respond back and they're like, yeah, actually that does kind of resonate. Really interesting. You open to jumping on a call to talk about it further. Whatever. Your disco call. Right. What's the, like, what's your approach to a disco call? Like just the prep side of it, and then like the follow-up, of course. So we've got like a blank slate here.
Okay. So I'm thinking about two things. One, you want to go into some type of discovery call with a hypothesis about what's going on inside of the organization, perhaps caused or kicked off by some type of larger shift inside of the industry. And then two things, what that means at the company level, and then for the specific contact that you're reaching out to. And when I say hypothesis, actually like write it out. This is something that you want to test against and evolve as you are going through discovery. And it's the way that you can lend your point of view to make it not an interrogation, but like a helpful conversation. So that's the first piece. So a hypothesis might sound like, because of what's happening, and this is at the industry level, because of X shift, company is trying to Y. And if they do, it means Z for this person. And so what you're doing is tying in some type of current event that is prioritized at the company level, which if addressed or if solved, it means good things for this contact. Like you want to try to get to the incentive for that particular person in the deal. And so as you are
back to the blot, are we blotting here? So it's going to be like, Nate, excited for our call later this week. Maybe like,
so you're talking email framework, like how do you set up an email?
I'm framing up the discovery call, right? So like, what's that like? What's the thing that comes after this within the blot, so that like I can be like, okay, I'm excited for our call. I don't want them to no-show me, but I also want to set up the best possible discovery call possible.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so there are two features in like that setup email that you're sending to them. This hypothesis is more like when you're in the call, like what are you trying to do? So in the setup, there are two things. One, I really like the way that Kyle AC talks about this, and it's outcomes, not agendas. The typical prep is, here's the agenda. We'll spend 5 minutes on this, 10 minutes on this, 10 minutes of this. And the point is, what are they going to get after the call? And so you might say, hey, after the call, I want to have both of us have a very clear point of view on how we might be able to help you X, whatever their job is, like increase response rates, drive more marketing source pipeline, like whatever it be. And then this is the second part of the framework, one non-obvious insight. So immediately what you want to do is, to the point on cold email, building curiosity, you need to sustain that to get them to show up to that call.
Yeah.
And then you might say something like, one thing I'm looking forward to sharing on this topic is X. Most people see it X. We've seen Y. So it's a little teaser of like, for example, if we go back to cold email replies, like looking forward to sharing some data that we found that could be helpful around why emails at a 5th grade level are most helpful, or, whatever it is, just some type of like the preview to the movie of like, yeah, okay, I want to buy a ticket and show up to this.
Yeah, man, I'm like thinking like, what would be my unique insight? I'd be like, oh, most people think, personalization can't scale, and we've got some ideas on process that I think you would love to learn more about.
Boom.
Or maybe it's like, or that, or like unsure tones. Probably be like my two like snippets that I always throw at people. Which, to your point on unsure tones, you allude to this idea of curiosity. I think is really neat, because like I talk about this in cold email and continuing to do this within follow-up emails, which is tease that there has to be something more down the line. And it ties back to a quote I heard from Ellie Emerson, who's a sales leader over at a company called Fresh Relevance. We were chatting. It was just like, we were on the same wavelength. But one of the things she was saying is like, as soon as you satisfy their curiosity, they have no reason to respond to you, right? And like the classic is like you shoot over a cold email and they say, oh, cool, how does it work with X, Y, or Z, right? Like they ask like a quick, like brusque question back, and you forget to ask a question back in response, and you just say, oh, and then you like answer the question, you get like super into it, but because you just answered the question, there's nothing left, right? There's nothing to reply to. They just got their answer.
Yeah. Well, the like,
oh, cool. Why do you ask?
I'm like, I can't wait to jump in here, because like the thing underneath this that is the beautiful reframe of something you hear all the time in sales is like, you need curious sellers, make curious sales reps. It's like, well, actually the job of a sales rep is to create a curious prospect or a curious buyer. Like when they become curious and they can't wait to learn more, that's how you pick up the momentum in the process. And so if you squash that or you satisfy it, to her point, then they cease being curious. Even if you are still curious, asking more questions, they're like, well, I don't want to just keep answering these questions because there's nothing in it for me to keep learning.
Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, no, it's sort of like, it's a popular, unpopular opinion, right? This idea of like, need to find curious sales reps. It's like, no, you need to find people who know how to make people curious. It just so happens that comes from being curious.
Yep. It's contagious when done right.
Contagious. I love it. Okay. So I love this. I love the one thing I'm looking forward to sharing. What's next? I'm thinking like, okay, so you've like pulled on this, like, okay, I'm getting them really interested, excited to dig in more. What's the next piece of the equation?
In the prep email before a discovery call?
Is it? That's it. Dang. That's cool.
That's it. Mostly because you've already got them to agree to a meeting. And so and this is one mistake I make all the time, is I keep selling when I don't need to sell anymore.
I was like juvenile seller over here. I was like, now I'm about to like go into something else, and like, you're like, no, you're done.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the thing that I've learned the hard way. Like I saw Jen Allen is in the audience right now. We were talking and I told her the story of when I had a SVP of a very prominent insurance company cut me off mid-sentence. He's like, Nate, stop selling. I got it. I'm there. And I like stopped in my tracks, and I was like, oh, dang, you're right. So anyway, it's something that you always got to come back to. Juvenile, experienced, whatever. It's part of it.
I love it. Okay. So we were talking about the disco call, and then I like totally side railed you. But the note that I have there though is like, because X company is trying to do Y, this means Z for the person we're reaching out to. What's how do you frame up that conversation so that you have a successful discovery call?
Yeah. So inside of the roadmap for the call, how you kind of pull out some insights that'll help you either confirm or correct the hypothesis. So it's a roadmap going from the problem or the current state that the buyer is facing today, which will allow you to frame up a really clear problem statement, and the payoff or the future state that they're looking to get to, like what is the outcome that they're after, and then bridging the two from problem today, payoff tomorrow. What's the process or the path that they need to walk? And the questions that you are asking all tie to one of those three like overarching buckets, if you will. And so this will help you, one, further develop that hypothesis or maybe change it. And then 2, of course, we're going to talk like post-discovery email framework, and then it'll give you the inputs that you need to build that out.
Right. So it's interesting. Should we go to what you should follow up with? And that way we can go back to the discovery call and be like, all right, what are we trying to actually piece out of this?
Yeah, I dig it. So if we go back to the point of the discovery call, the agenda is to try to figure out, like, can we get you to this outcome?
Yeah.
Based on where you are today, right? So there are 3 pieces to the framework. First is the problem statement. And we'll kind of fill in the padding language. Like there's going to be some next steps, like, hey, we'd agree to set up a demo and so on, like that. I'm just going to give you kind of like the overall principles based on what's going to be different for every person in the conversation. And then we can pad it with more of the, the standard kind of details and things like that.
Yeah.
So first, problem. That's the most important thing, is to come away with a clear problem statement, particularly if we're talking consensus-based selling or some type of complex deal. So the problem statement is where you're recapping. Yep. So what is the issue? What's driving the issue? What's its cost? Who it's impacting? And why it's getting worse. Those are the elements. And I have a kind of a little formula, if you will, but you're exactly right. Today I heard.
Yep. Like, what's your formula? I'm just like freewheeling it here.
Oh no. Well, so there's 2 different ones, and actually I can let's see. Are we still in our same doc? Yeah. Okay. Let me pull it up, and I'll drop it in here.
I'll drop it.
Yeah. Look at this. We're collaborating, and actually I'll say one of the best things that you can do that I see is like totally underutilized is after the discovery call, dropping some of these notes into a shared doc that you then begin developing throughout the deal cycle together. And it's, I don't know, for whatever reason, it's so very rarely done. But okay, so here are two different options. So I heard you mention like every month, at least, let's go back to the earlier example, like at least 20,000 visitors hit the marketing site, but without
bigger so that folks can see it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Good call. There you go.
Cool.
Oh, my computer's about to die. I got to unplug my light and plug in my computer. I'm gonna hang out in my cave for a little while. Okay, there we go. So in the example that we were talking through earlier, like we're talking site visitors for self-serve product tour, it's like, so every month, at least 10,000 sub 100 person accounts or something like that hit the site but lose trust and don't convert. That costs you X dollars in pipeline. And if that's not addressed by, let's say it's like Q3, right? We got to turn in numbers for our next like raise.
Yeah.
That's good. That's going to be a big issue. So there you go. Yeah. Problem statement.
Paints a real clear picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, back to the discovery call, you have to ask the right questions to get that info.
That's right.
Now, I'm a huge advocate for like spin selling, and like this idea of like the order in which you ask questions opens a prospect up to give you this stuff, right? You can't just be like, you just like start like peppering them with questions about like, is XYZ a problem? Yes. Cool. Check the box. I got them to confirm.
Right.
I'm curious how you talk to them about getting these statements out.
Yeah. So what you want to try to figure out is why this is actually an issue, but you don't want to just follow up and say, why is this an issue? You need to demonstrate some type of understanding of their business. So for example, if it's like, we have a pretty low conversion rate on cold visitors to our website, instead of saying, well, why is that a problem? They'd be like, well, we're losing demo conversions, obviously. You might say something like, well, I imagine that's just one source of opportunities or marketing sourced opportunities or leads. Like, what does that mean in the context of all of the other marketing activities that you're doing? And so obviously they know you sell a self-serve website product tour. And what you're trying to do is figure out all of the reasons that don't relate to your product that they may focus on something else, that they may end up ghosting you. You're stepping into their job and looking at all of the different things that you're doing. And that's where most people lock into discovery questions that directly tie and relate to their product, and they miss all of the other avenues. So the real question is like, why is a low website conversion a big deal in the context of everything else that they're doing? If they say, hey, look, 80% of the pipeline that is driven by marketing comes through the website. It's like, oh, got it. Totally different conversation once you understand that.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. One of the things that I've found, it's like, I won't say it's a silver bullet because there is no such thing, but a question that opens people up to share more is, what got you excited to have this call today? Obviously, the more researched you are before you just pepper that question in, the better off you're going to get, like, as far as an answer, right? Like, it's like, hey, Nate, like, I noticed the following things. It's why I reached out. And I'm personally pretty excited about this call because I know that we're driving really good value for people like you when it comes to all the following things, right? But I think it would be helpful for me to get an understanding of like, why did you get excited for our call today?
There you go. I like it. And sometimes I'll throw like a self-deprecating spin on there, is like, look, I may be the most boring person that you talked with this week. So there's got to be something else in this conversation that you were looking forward to, and then I agree. I like the way you start that because it just opens up a helpful direction because you're figuring out what's important to this person.
Yeah. Well, and then what they do is they give you like some kind of answer, and it can start to open up the opportunity back to spin, which I'm just a dork about. It starts to open up the opportunity for more like situation questions like, oh, okay, well, what are you doing for this? What are you doing for that? And back to your point, the situation questions need to be broader reaching than just what you do. They need to go wider. They need to focus on, all of the different aspects of that person's to-do list so that you understand not just like what you're competing with within your own little spectrum, but like the entire priority list that you're competing with.
Yeah, that's right. And you mentioned earlier, multi-threading is a key thing. The more you ask questions that relate to the broader team's needs, and actually the best thing is asking questions that this person can't answer in the meeting. They need to go find those answers afterward. That's how you become increasingly multi-threaded. And it all kicks off with that very first discovery call.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like we could do like a whole hour on that.
Well, I'll pun intended, to put a spin on this is what you can do is leave some blanks open, right? You want to sustain some of that curiosity. And so part of this recap could be, we're not totally sure what this represents or translates to in terms of pipeline with that second segment of opportunities, right? And so part of discovery is going to continue on past this first recap because you're posing the thing that was left unanswered.
Yeah. And sometimes there's value in that alone, right? Like sometimes you get into questions of like I know with us, right? We get into questions of like, how long do you think sales reps are spending writing emails? And they're like, I have no idea. I'm like, it's something we could help with, but like, it's not like intended as a trap question, right? It's intended as like a, how are you tracking these activity metrics today? Have you set a process around this, right? It's more of like trying to get a feel for like how they think about personalization, but it opens up opportunity for you to like slide in like, oh, cool. By the way, it's like something we do, but like carry the conversation forward where you're just like kind of teasing that there's like something exciting to check out.
There you go. This is the way, Will. This is the way. It's beautiful.
Oh man, I knew this was going to be good. I feel like we have like 17 more sessions like this in us.
I know. I know. I feel like we're on hour 1 of 10 to cover.
Yeah, the 10-part series. How to close a deal.
Right. Well, I mean, in the last couple minutes, I mean, we can either finish this off. We can leave people a little curious and maybe send them something in follow-up, or we can take some, we can look at the comments, the questions. What do you want to do?
Good question. I guess if people have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can totally answer those. I think if we don't get any questions in like the shortest of short terms, maybe let's just finish this email off.
I like it. And I also like Will B's comment. Let's do a series. I'd be down for that.
Series. I love it.
All right. This was just the trailer for the rest of the series. Okay. So I'll fly through the rest of this framework then. So second piece, once you've got that problem statement or open questions about it, is you need to talk approach. Most people will jump into product. They get happy ears and say, okay, great. You have this problem. We sell this product. What do you think? Let's get married. But when the goal of this discovery is to set up a demo, A, or B, get other people involved in the discovery process, because you need to do a deeper dive before you need to talk about the approach. And so this is where you would say something like, let's just continue the example of the earlier thing is the key to increasing site conversions is building trust. You were feeling that the most effective way to do this is previewing your solution. Notice you are still leaving the deal open to other avenues. Like you could put up a video recording. You could put up some case study, testimonies, people talking about the product. It doesn't have to be a self-serve product tour, right?
Yeah.
And so you're building this logical bridge over to the product, which is now where you're beginning to describe the requirements of what must be true in a product for it to fulfill that approach. Now, depending on how complex the deal is, again, your discovery email or this follow-up may stop here. You may not have the inputs that you need, and you may be posing more of a question. So an outstanding question here is what needs to be true of a specific solution in order to fit this approach. Or you could go one step deeper and say, hey, you mentioned that what needs to be true of a solution for it to work in your case is A, it's got to be able to scale, or B, capture names, or whatever the types of things are. And what you are doing is setting up the first 5 minutes of that demo. So let's say you got through and you began to develop and ideally influence some of those requirements. Then in the points that you're listing here is you're basically saying, hey, these are the things that we're going to go through. And this is where you conclude with your next steps. Exactly. Points of what we provide and points that you provide relevant or related to.
Well, and if you don't know the list of points, it's a question of how do we go about that? So list points of what we provide, or list of questions that need to be answered.
Yep.
And then 4, what's that piece?
And then 4 is a very short conclusion focused on the payoff. It's this was interesting because if we can do this, if we solve this problem, this thing happens. Or you might say something like, the reason why you wanted to continue the conversation is because this relates to John's priority of X pipeline. I think John may want to be in the next convo of X date. This is where you're setting up the next step in order to drive to an expanding reach into the buying organization.
Yeah. So basically this is where you focus on the next steps, right? So it's if we can do this, sounds like you'll accomplish X, and then you go into next steps.
Exactly. Because ideally you've already confirmed what those next steps are in the conversation. So it's not an ask that you're needing to bluff and put that piece up front because that's already settled and decided. Ideally it's on the calendar.
Yeah, that's a good point. Next steps should be on the calendar from the disco call.
Exactly.
Well, cool, man. Nate, this is a blast. I feel like we just deep.
So deep we didn't get past discovery, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I thought we'd get all the way down into closing or whatnot, but this is great.
Oh, man.
I think
it
was time well spent going deep, and I am honored to be on the inaugural LinkedIn live session for Lavender. So thank you guys for having me. Absolute honor.
I had a feeling that this would be just as good as it turned out to be. So thank you, Nate. Appreciate it. If folks want to follow you, where should we point them to? Just your LinkedIn?
Well, LinkedIn, of course, number one. And then two, if you like to nerd out on like real long form type content, you can always follow the blog. You can find it in the profile, but it's fluent.io/blog. And every 2 weeks, I write long form stuff about sales there.
I love it, man. Well, Nate, until next time.
Thank you, Will. Thanks, everybody.